Welcome to Adoption Matters, a podcast with real people sharing their stories and getting real about adoption from all three perspectives of the adoption triad. I'm Kim Noeth, a birth mom, and I'll be sharing along with Sharon Butler-Obazee, an adoptee, and Sally Ankerfelt, an adoptive parent. As adoption attuned coaches, we will explore difficult topics and share frank conversations guided by our commitment to truth telling and truth seeking. Welcome, everyone. Despite the occasional indecisiveness in the weather these days, it seems to be November already. And in the adoption community, November represents a national attempt at creating awareness around adoption called National Adoption Awareness Month. The Department of Welfare released this year's theme, Honoring Youth and Strengthening Pathways for Lasting Bonds, with the intended audience being child welfare workers. As coaches and members of the adoption community, we found this year's theme both curious and thought-provoking, and we wanted to talk about it from a tri-spective point of view. So we invited along today with us Patrice Martin. So she will be our special guest in this conversation. By day, Patrice is a strategic leader helping corporate, public, and nonprofit organizations to improve their processes. And by night, she's an adoptee rights activist, creating space for healing for those impacted by the child welfare system. Patrice, welcome. We are so honored by your presence here today. And as we attempt to lend a tri-spective point of view around National Adoption Awareness Month, we knew you'd be a great guest, especially considering your passion for those, impacted by the child welfare system. So we thought it'd be great if you maybe start us off by telling us who you be, and then we can, start the conversation.
Certainly, certainly. Well, I'm glad to be here with you all today. I am an adoptee who has known all of her life. I've known all my life that I was adopted. Um, I had a pivotal turn in my story in 2019 when I was reunited with my birth family on the TLC show Long Lost Family. And I
Wow.
was Yes, wow. That's a whole story in and of itself, for another podcast. But at so like I said, I have always known that I was adopted. At about in my mid-20s or so, my adoptive mom let me know that there was a bit more to my story that she had, withheld because she didn't, in her words, want me to feel like I was actually thrown away. But my story is that I was actually abandoned next to a trash bin in 1976, in October of 1976, right after I was born. Um, to a birth mom who had pretty much a mental health crisis at the time. And she had already had one daughter, and she just had a mental break. But subsequently, minutes or maybe an hour later, there's an article that talks about, my story at that time. And it says that there was an anonymous caller, and she actually called, the police and told them where I was. Um, when I learned more about her story, and how her story intersected with mine, um, it started my and the way that the staff on that show treated me, started me on a collision course with understanding about adoptee rights and understanding about how our stories need to be centered. And looking at, as I love the work that you all do, the whole triad, and seeing if we can make things different and make things better for people that are coming after us. I'm very passionate about that. So from that, I've started working in there's three main areas that I concentrate my advocacy work in. The first is legislative reform, looking at the system. I'm always saying it's the system. It's the system. Policies, laws, things of that nature. If I can lend my voice to that, and we may talk about a little bit about some of the stuff I've done in that area. Um, and then I look at the faith community. It's important to me. My faith, I'm a Christian, and the faith community is important to me. However, there have been some deep harms caused. And I would like to um, be a part of, since I'm a part of the community of faith, bringing awareness to that, but also turning the tide and bringing some healing in that regard. And then lastly, I call it the media, right? In different sectors. If I can speak on a podcast, if I can help inform stories or in the media of how birth moms are portrayed, adoptees are portrayed, even at times, adoptive parents, whoever, um, help inform those systems so that people really brought into an awareness of what adoption really is and the complexities of it. Because too often I think there has been a one-sided story told, and I think we need to tell all of it. And that's why I'm just so grateful for the work that you all are doing.
Boy, Patrice, that's beautiful. Thanks for all of that and for the work that you're doing. And you touched on a lot of things, right? Because to be able to really work out there and be, in the real field, you've got to be able to deal with the realities that are also existing behind the scenes. And one of the ones that you mentioned, the church trauma, that's one I'd like to, hear a little bit more about. We could definitely have a huge, I know I've seen that, on my end as well. But today, as we focus, a little bit on this year's intended audience, we found it really intriguing that the Department of Welfare has this theme, and the intended audience is child welfare workers. And we thought, that's really curious, that in creating awareness, the awareness that they're trying to create in speaking to the workers, we thought like about the effectiveness of that. And that kind of opened up a conversation for each of us as to what type of support we found really existed in the community. And we
Mm.
thought we would share each of our perspectives on that a little. Patrice, maybe you can start us off on that conversation a little bit about maybe what was aware and what you see aware currently.
Yeah, it's really this is a really, really good conversation as far as like supports. I do believe that yes, child welfare workers, that they have numerous cases. We all know, we hear the stories about, overload. I'm actually going to pivot and go in a direction here, and I live in the state of Tennessee. And one of the things that I try to follow is child welfare, legislation here. And I was really, really troubled probably about a year and a half ago when I saw that there had been some legislation passed here that shortened the time of home studies um, for children because there was there's an overabundance of children that were in the system. So they thought, oh well, one way to get that is to just kind of fast track, children in the system. And I thought to myself, and I'll kind of interweave pieces of my own story in that, how dangerous that is, right? Um, in my own story, I have part of the story, and just honestly, is that I was adopted to wonderful, wonderful adoptive parents. However, my adoptive father did have a substance abuse issue that went undetected, and I think that if you had done some a little bit more due diligence and some things like that, that may have come up in some ways. And so I'm always going to err on no the side of don't shorten the time of home studies. Um, how may we be able to do some things differently to support and keep children centered? And that is where I feel like the whole conversation always has to be. So even if you're talking about caseworkers, adoption workers, it's in that vein. And interacting with anybody, it's still, it should have been supporting how can caseworkers better, we're focusing support children this month. That's what we're looking at.
Exactly.
I understand the intention, and there's always this intention, right, to highlight these people that are hardworking, that are doing things, and many a time performing acrobatics in situations that we're learning now, right? That there are abolition movements and reform movements that a lot of these social workers are becoming a part of, right? I'm seeing more and more of that. And that's because they're saying too, no, this system isn't working, and they're tired of the stress and strain on themselves, and they just want to genuinely be able to help. But they know that the system has to be reformed in this form that it's in.
Hmm.
And so I'm always going to say that, and I'm okay with saying that children need to be at the center of this conversation.
Yeah. You know, Patrice, I find that to be really true. As an adoptee, fellow adoptee, you know, I sort of question, or I'm extremely interested in how this whole idea of providing assistance to the social workers and the professionals over the family, how they prioritize that. You know, and what did they see as a pathway towards getting towards the family that actually needs the support, the child who actually needs the support, the birth mother who needs the support? You know, how are we using the tri-spective model to consider all the pieces that are involved in National Adoption Month? National Adoption Month to me seems like something that should be geared towards the people who are interacting and participating in the service or the situation. You know, I recently have become more involved with family preservation. And I feel like this work has allowed me to see the other side of the spectrum, you know, because I've been working primarily with educating and helping people to understand what it is to be adopted, or what, you know, has to happen in an adoptive family for the adoptee to feel attuned. But now I'm seeing on the other side of the spectrum what has to go into preserving that family. So I feel in a way I'm an extension of what the professionals are providing to the individuals, at least the families that might be able to keep the kids. What if we didn't have adoption? You know, and it went the other way. You know, so that is a big question mark in my mind. How can we be more thorough?
Well, I agree with you, and that would be the other side of the coin. If you know, if we were talking about that, we may get down that road further. And I could not agree with you more. But since there is this month, this theme, I feel like that should be the theme. But ultimately, oh wow, I dream a world that you're talking about, right? That it starts with that it's not even National Adoption Month. It's a family preservation centered month, and all of the things, right, are highlighted. And yeah, that's the big dream, right?
I mean, I guess my question is, what's in the best interest of the child?
I think too, like for adoptive parents, that if we really are tuning into our kids, we would be really advocating for first family preservation. Because who wants a child, or I'll just say a human being, to have that kind of disconnection, that kind of trauma? It's like we don't, and I know I think a lot of adoptive parents, after they get into it, really do. It starts adoptive parent centric. You know, I want to be a parent, and I'm going to go to any length to do it. And like you said, Patrice, also, I'll do the classes, you know, but I just want it to be a drive-by, kind of check out quick, or window shopping on the classes. I don't want to do a deep dive or the home study. I just want to get that done, you know, because that feels invasive. So all this adoptive parent centric thinking. But boy, when a child comes into the home, and if an adoptive parent is half aware of the fact that the pain that this has caused, would we not want the same for any person to be able to? I've told my kids, I do not ever would not have wished this for you. And that's not negating my love for them. It's just saying, this is terrible, right? And so we have to, I believe, Sharon, part of strengthening family bonds is also working and advocating for attention to first families and actually providing more resources there. And that's also strengthening family bonds. And that, once again, that's an adoptee-centric viewpoint, you know.
That's great, Sally. I was thinking, you know, as a birth mom who's created resources for adoption agencies to try to help them support both adoptive parents and their birth moms, one thing that I've seen is that it's the caseworkers who burn out, you know, who aren't there for the long haul. And it's often the caseworkers who are in the fields, but they can't make the decisions that are needed in order to provide support for these, you know, moms and for these families. You know, as I advocate to agencies, they're like, oh, well, it's just not in our funds or our budget this month. You know, well, even if the caseworker sees a great need, and, you know, she says to me, there's a great need for this in the community, her voice, you know, isn't as powerful as the director. And often these caseworkers are coming and going because they get so burnt out that these concerns don't get to the director, and these, you know, services don't get improved upon. What are your thoughts about that, Patrice?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. You know what I think? I think there has to be, and I think all of you were alluding to this. I think before we can even talk about the conversation, there needs to be a foundation shift in the narrative. So when you talk about what, you know, what you were just talking about, that burnout, what if we were working from a narrative that we're really talking about, first off, I'll start. I say this all the time. You don't have a kid in crisis without a mom in crisis. So for me, full stop, I've gotten down grassroots level of it. We have to talk about how we're dealing with women with crisis pregnancies, just flat out, and how we're resourcing women in crises that have children.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. And
That
that's
is not, that's the discussion. It's not, you know, people needing to be placed and all that. That should come so far down the road. You're talking about, you know, Sharon, you're talking about, we haven't even seen what resources someone needs. Do they need housing? Is it because, you know, I'm in the middle of reading Relinquished right now, by Gretchen Sisson, and I don't know if you guys have, but I read some. I keep picking it up and putting it down, picking it, because it's a lot, but it's the truth is just in front of us.
Yeah.
And the profile of who her book, when she starts off talking about a profile, and she talks about, this isn't the teen mom that you think. You know, there are some in there, right? But there's also women that already have children, which was in my case, and ended up in a relationship with somebody and it didn't work out, or they were, you know, and a lot of it is around socioeconomic status and poverty and things like that. These are the things that we need to be talking about. How many of our children are born into poverty? How many people are in these situations where they don't have the resources? See, that shifts the narrative right there.
If I can interject quickly, that I've often heard them say, instead of a GoFundMe for adoptive families, that same GoFundMe could be used to start, you know, to help that birth mom get
exactly. And so that's the foundational shift in what you're talking about. Then we're talking about another shift in, if someone's in crisis, how do we view them? You know, if there's just because you're a mom and you're having a mental health crisis does not mean that you don't, in this country, we're not saying that you shouldn't be a mom. What are we saying here? And so to your point, Sally, If you have some kids who have a mom that's having a mental health crisis and they come to you and they really need to be in your care. If you start that foundational as an adoptive parent or a legal guardian, whatever you are, what do you say to those children about their mom?
Right.
And you teach them about the power of, mental health and all the things, but you're really pouring into them, letting them know that their mom's a beautiful woman and all of these things, but that, what about us taking care of our mental health and just really, really an opportunity. I see a lot of this as opportunity here to change the narrative on a lot of things instead of the punitive mental health crises come in. Okay, the children aren't well kept. You found out that the mom's been just depressed, overwhelmed, all the things. Somebody immediately may need to help in and do the day-to-day care for her kids.
Yeah.
But the way we treat her.
Yeah. Right.
And then she's got to fight 5, 6, one of my heroes in the movement of abolition is Joyce McMillan. You separate her from her kids and then she's got to fight 5 to 10 years to get them back. And you don't think that causes compounding mental health issues and substance abuse and all the things?
You're so right, man. As you were talking, Patrice, only thing I could think of, I know that we don't live in a perfect world.
No, we don't.
So there's not going to be situations where an adoption is required. Maybe needs to be something, going on with the woman at this point in time that we have to facilitate adoption for the child's best interest. But then when you do the adoption, have it mandated that it be open. Have it mandated that everybody, even if you're adopted privately, get your birth certificate. Have it mandated the mother can be involved with the family and the father, if he's in position to do this.
But here's the point. Sally, it gets right at what you're talking about. That shifts the paradigm for adoption right there. You're not getting into this thing if you don't want to fully support children then, if we shift the narrative. Because it's not about you.
There's no room for ego, right?
It's not being used to fulfill some need that you have. Right. You're really about, and I said, the growth and development of this child throughout their lifespan. That is, if you get in this, it should be the only thing that you should be in it for. I talked about if we change this narrative, what this would look like. At the outset, it would look like adoptive parents understanding that children are always grieving a loss. People don't want to hear this.
Right.
They don't want to hear this. That's just adoptees whining, but not being grateful, all the things that, you get accused. We scientifically know, we psychologically know.
Yes.
Especially even on the birth mom side, when people are separated from their children, it creates shifts in their brain and it creates attachment disorder, all the things.
Right.
CPTSD, and the grief of the loss. Even if you're a baby and you never even, spent 2 minutes having your body, it just does.
Yes.
We're studying it, but it's a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's just act, you adopt parents from that space. There's grief of women, how we treat women in this country. I say all the time. Birth moms, there's grief there. They need counseling. There's, I have a friend, Dr. Zubo, who's doing a study right now. Some of her data that she's collected on birth moms and suicidality and all of the things, substance abuse, are real. And if I, could do my research really, really quick, I would probably, if we talk to grief counselors or whatever, a lot of this stuff is likened to the grief and loss that they've experienced.
Same for adoptees.
And then thirdly, again, the only center that I think that, and this is the good news, right, for adoptive parents, if you're in it, is that if you take that focus, the growth and development, throughout the lifespan of a person, yes, there's adoptive parents who are like, they want to parent. Everybody wants to feel good about the work that they're doing or what they're doing. So the what's in it for you is that if you take that approach, you're contributing to the growth and development of beauty in a circumstance that has been hard. And you can feel good about that. There's nothing wrong with feeling good about help, that type of help. I don't think that would be crazy if you didn't feel good about that. But that's not your chief aim.
Right. Right. Yep.
That's going to be a byproduct of the stance that you take.
Boy, Patrice, we could go on for hours and just about this topic, let alone all the other things we want to talk to you about. So I think that might be a really great place to kind of just wrap up here. And before we close, we'd love if you tell us a little bit about what you're currently up to and where people can find you.
Yeah. So we haven't really formally announced, but I'll just say it's one project I'm working on and I am truly excited about. It's called The Collective. And I'm not going to out us because we're in November we're launching, but it is a collective of first moms and adoptees in the faith space. I gotta tell you, the content is good. It's some good stuff.
That's exciting. I'm intrigued. Came alone.
And it's launching in this month to, yes, be honest, a counter narrative, but also shed light on some of the perspectives that we've talked about. So I'm excited about that work. And with that group, I'm just like a small piece of that the folks that are involved in that, it's just absolutely amazing. So we'll get you guys some information on that. I am thinking about looking at, and I've had some conversations of recent, I did some testimony earlier this year around the safe haven baby boxes. I personally am opposed to them for numerous reasons, but we don't have time to go into that. So just been in the ear of someone in another state who just trying to help coach them around that. So that's the legislative piece. Like there's a lot of this work, right, that you guys would agree, like people come to you and it's behind the scenes. It's not very loud, but anytime I can kind of help someone else. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. And then one other thing is, and even on Thursday we have it, just started a grassroots movement, I call it, called the Adoptee Prayer Collective. And on Thursday we're going to have prayer, but we just hold a space for anybody who's an ally, but especially it's adoptee and non-parent expected centered. And I can get you information about that. But once a month, I just try to hold a space where we can meditate, pray, talk in that whole space of faith. It's important to folks. And so that's what I'm up to.
I think we, the people, make some of the most beautiful resources when we put our hearts into giving back to the community. Well, thank you so much, Patrice. It's been a great conversation. And thank you for listening to Adoption Matters. Help others find this podcast by leaving a rating on your preferred podcast platform. And if you'd like more information about growing intentional families together and their adoption attuned coaches, or if you'd like to sign up for your free coaching consultation, please visit us at giftfamilyservices.com. We've enjoyed being with you, and we invite you to join us again next time for another episode of Adoption Matters.
Thanks, Patrice.
Thank you so much.
Patrice.